Thank you for attending this session. I'm very delighted to be on stage with so many bright people. On my right sits Francis West, who is the founder of Francis West Co. and is a former Chief Accessibility Officer with IBM. On my left sits Susan Scott Parker, who is the CEO of Business Disability International. On the far left sits Ivo van den Brand, who is the brand manager with Huawei. And our rapporteur is Deborah Rue, the CEO of Global Impact. I'm going to start with Ivo, if you're okay.
Yes, I am okay.
I would like to hear from you what your perspective is about how we leverage technology to facilitate the employment of people with disabilities.
Do you want me to answer that now, or do you want me to go to the presentation?
Feel free to go to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So yeah, I've actually gone and made a presentation to talk about our perspective on AI and inclusivity and how it impacts and positively benefits the world of the workforce. And the way I'd like to do that is by talking about how we use AI as part of our Tech for All program. And let me first introduce myself. My name is Ivo. I am the brand manager at Huawei's Western Europe HQ. I'm also the project lead for an initiative called StorySign, which you will learn a bit more today. And I am part of the working group for Tech for All. Before I start, I think it's quite useful to explain a tiny bit about who Huawei is and what our relevance is, because I recognize a lot of people will have heard about us, but not necessarily know who we are, what we do, and where we come from. And where we come from is here. So in 1987, Huawei was founded by a single man called Mr. Ren, virtually with no money in this building. And now, 33 years later, we have 180,000 employees. We operate in 170 countries. We effectively connect a third of the world's population through our infrastructure, our cloud services, and through our hardware consumer products, our smartphones and our other smart devices. I think you'll probably agree that coming from these humble beginnings to get to that scale is quite an impressive accomplishment. And how we got there is through a relentless dedication on innovation, which is very relevant to today's conversation, I think. So when I say innovation, I mean years and years and years of strong, genuine dedication, investment in R&D, in more research, more development, higher standards, pushing boundaries, and genuinely just making things better for everyone. We invest more than 10% of our, I need to move closer to the microphone. Annually invest more than 10% of our sales revenue into R&D. Last year, even 14%, making us the 5th biggest investor in innovation in the world. We have 45% of our staff is involved in innovation in one way, shape, or form in our company. We have 14 R&D centers, 36 innovation centers all over the world. We're the global number 2 in terms of smartphone products. And why this is all relevant is because I'm obviously not here to talk about our R&D creds, and I'm not here to talk about why we are an amazing company. But the point I wanted to make is that all of this innovation wouldn't be possible without the drive and the belief and the optimism that comes from our purpose. Our purpose as a company, instilled by our founder, and our purpose, which is that the thing that drives 180,000 employees to do what they do every single day. And our purpose is this: to bring digital to every home, person, and organization for a fully connected, intelligent world. I appreciate that corporate missions can sometimes sound a bit clunky, but it's really, really interesting to understand what it really means. So if you dissect it and you look at the first line, to bring digital to every home, person, and organization, that's everyone. That is no exclusion, total inclusion. And it might read like just a sentence as part of a corporate mission statement, but it's not. I can tell you and I can guarantee you that everything we do genuinely is focused on everyone. It's not in people's mind in our company to exclude people, which I think is very relevant to today's conversation. Secondly, the intelligent connected world refers to three things. It refers to bringing people together and unity, connecting people. It also, the intelligent part refers to our AI, which is obviously part of today's conversation. And then the third part is the combination of technology and human expertise. We believe that technology shouldn't replace people. It should extend what's humanly possible. It should help unlock the world's greatest resource, which is human potential. And that is how we look at AI, and that is genuinely, as a company, how we try to use our technology to make the world a better place. That's what drives us. And the Tech for All program is a really good proof point of how we do this. The Tech for All program is an umbrella that we have internally to bring together all the projects in which we use our R&D, our innovation power, our AI, to make the world a better place. And there's one project I'd like to talk to you about in today's context, which is very dear to my heart. It's something that I've worked many days and nights in the last year on myself. And it's all about this young lady. And this is Star. Star is the personification of StorySign. Now, what is StorySign? Last year, someone told us, an agency partner that we work with, told us that there are 32 million deaf children in the world, and many of whom struggle to read. Literacy is a really big issue within the deaf community, and I personally didn't know. And obviously, literacy is a really big problem because if you think about it, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, which means from day one, there is a communication barrier, which has a massive knock-on effect on how you, as a parent, tell your child, your deaf child in this context, stories in the younger years, how you read with them, how you read to them, how the extended family reads with them. And obviously, if that reading has a challenge, then that has a genuine knock-on effect on education, and it has a knock-on effect on their further life in work, etc., etc. Their entire future is influenced by the fact that at a young age, they can't learn to read in the same way as their hearing parents do because they don't learn to read phonetically. So what we did is we teamed up with a number of partners to understand the problem better because we thought this is awful and also this is completely unnecessary. Surely there is a solution to this problem. So we engaged the European Union of the Deaf, local deaf associations across Europe. We worked with schools, we worked with the community, with families, to find a solution to this problem. And we took our AI and we built StorySign, a free mobile app that uses our AI technology to translate popular children's books to sign language. So that families, mothers, fathers, siblings, grandparents, can read with these young deaf children to make sure that they can have the futures that everyone deserves. And I can genuinely talk about StorySign all day long, but I've only got 8 minutes. So I won't do that. So I'll just show you a video which I think explains the story much better.
Literacy is a really big issue within the deaf community. Many deaf children can't learn letters phonetically, so they struggle to match words with sounds.
Tinks is finding learning to read very, very difficult. It would usually include lots of ripped books being thrown across the room.
StorySign is a simple idea. An app which takes the words from children's books and instantly turns them into sign language, so deaf children and their parents can read and sign together.
Families at home with deaf children will be able to get a book and use the app to sign and read for the first time.
StorySign utilizes the power of Huawei's Kirin AI chip paired with OCR technology, so the app is more accurate and even works in low-light conditions for bedtime stories.
As the world's leading publisher, we feel deaf children should have the same access to stories as their hearing friends. We're opening our library of hundreds of classic children's books through StorySign.
We created Star, the most advanced signing avatar ever, able to sign to all deaf children in the 11 countries we launched in.
She came home and got my phone and she kept pointing to it and saying, I want that app, I want that app.
StorySign is fantastic. It's technology that will change the future of an entire generation.
It is all thanks to the new StorySign app, which has been developed to help thousands of deaf
Revolutionary new app, StorySign.
Thank you very much, Ivo. It really
I'm nearly done. I'm nearly done. I've got 2 more slides. I think it's important to mention, because you saw the numbers around views and reach and video views, etc. Because as part of the program, yes, we wanted to help solve the problem through an app, and the app by no means is finished or done or complete or perfect. It's an ongoing development process. But also we wanted to raise awareness for the challenges that deaf children face when they're around literacy. So we found it really important to also use our scale and our size and our footprint in all these markets to tell this story, which we've been doing. And in the video, it says 11 markets. We launched in December last year at Christmas in 11 countries with 13 sign languages, because sign languages are local. Therefore, 11 countries have different sign languages, even though it might be English or French. It's not the same sign language. We're currently in 14 sign languages. We're available for free worldwide. You don't pay anything. There's hardly any branding, I think, in the app. There's certainly no commercial benefits to the app in any way, shape, or form. And the one thing that I think I'm personally proudest of, which again speaks to the inclusivity, is the StorySign is not just available via the Huawei App Gallery on Huawei devices. StorySign is available for free on the Google Play Store for every Android device that you might have anywhere. It's available on iOS. We specifically developed different apps for different competitor smartphone products, because we recognize that if you are a family with a deaf child in America, you will struggle to find a Huawei phone in America. But if you have a deaf child in America, there's no reason why you shouldn't have StorySign. You shouldn't be able to read with your deaf children in the way that people elsewhere do. So personally, I'm quite proud of the fact that we put the time and the effort in to develop an iOS app and to develop it in American Sign Language, even though that's not necessarily our commercial focus. And the most important stat, and the thing that tells us that we're doing a good job, and again, I will reiterate, by no means it's perfect and by no means it's done, is that someone told me the other day that we currently have 50,000 downloads of the app. We only launched about a year ago. But 34% of downloads are daily active users. So people use it. And that, to me, it gives me goosebumps that I say it now. The fact that people actually use it regularly, and that we're genuinely making a meaningful impact on people's lives, on families' lives, on children's lives, and the extended family, that makes it worthwhile, and that shows us that we're doing something right. And it's also the reason why we won't stop and why we will keep going. We will add more books, we will add more languages, we will further develop it. We will build towards a future in which our AI enables us to translate into sign language in real time, any sign language, anywhere in the world, because ultimately our aim is, as soon as possible, to help every deaf child in the world learn to read. And I think it's a very, very long-winded answer to a relatively simple question. But the fact that we believe the technology should be available to everyone, regardless of where you're from and who you are, and the fact that we do all of these things to make the world a better place through technology and AI playing such a big part of it, that is the point I wanted to make today. And I'd like to quote your quote from this morning, that the greatest threat for this planet is people waiting for someone else to solve it. And I think we will certainly not do that. We will not wait, and I'm quite proud to work for Huawei that has a mission to enable me to do this. And that was it.
Thank you very much, Ivo. It really illustrates the idea that AI can serve inclusion. As of,
Brilliant.
yeah, absolutely. As of the first day of, well, I'm sorry, it's moving really because it really shows that, you know, disability inclusion is a human factor first. Yeah. Thank you, Ivo. I would like now to turn to Francis. Francis, you wrote in your book, Authentic Inclusion, that technology must serve the human beings. Can you elaborate a little more and share with us your perspective when it comes to how we could best leverage AI to facilitate the employment of people with disabilities?
Well, thank you, Eve, for that question. So let me just do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Francis West, and like Eve said, I'm a founder of my company, Francis West Co. It's a global advisory company working with government, NGOs, and specifically business and startup in what I call operationalizing inclusion. And to me, my whole background is in technology. I spent 30 plus years at IBM, and my last job was the most influential and frankly a life-changing job. I didn't know anything about disability or accessibility until I took the job as the head of IBM accessibility organization, and it really opened my eyes as to the technology impact of humanity. And very interesting, just like Ivo said, you know, Huawei puts, you know, technology innovation as the key area of addressing, you know, societal problem like education, which we saw a great example of how the Huawei technology can help children to learn. At the same time, it is very important that we understand that we have to think about that especially the employment issue with people with disability, which is a societal topic, just like education, in the context of innovation. And I think it's, you know, historically, because of this area has been, in many cases, start with a policy kind of approach, and which lead to legislation and compliance. A lot of the time, the discussion about technology get lost in the shuffle, in the sense that many discussion will start with compliances. And yet, at the same time, if you look at the history of technology, we have evolved from the beginning of the technology. When I first joined IBM back 30 plus years ago, technology was meant for what we call system optimization, meaning the technology, like the mainframe technology, was meant for processing a lot of you know, records or data, you know. But it was not like today, where the technology has moved significantly to what we call the personalized or consumer-based technology. And all of us have heard about the word, you know, that everybody wants personalized learning, personalized education, personalized medicine, because technology now enables us to do that. But at the same time, the whole idea of inclusion was actually not necessarily embedded into the basic thinking of technology. So what we found is that we have a situation where the technology, even though they understand that the technology is at their fingertip, that they can influence individual consumer or individual human beings' usage of technology, they not intrinsically understand the value of humanity's input in the technology design. So like Eve said, I wrote a book earlier this year called Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation. My view is that people with disability, just like people who gender or religion or any constituents that's not quote-unquote mainstream, actually can significantly contribute to the innovation, especially with technology. And without their participation, what we will risk, especially in the artificial intelligence world, the missing quote-unquote perspectives. And this is at the point where in my book, I talked about as the machine gets more human, because we know AI stands for artificial intelligence, that means the machine is learning to be more human. That means human needs to be more human. So from that perspective, if you're in the HR or human resources or you're an NGO or advocacy, this is absolutely the time where you need to engage your technology counterparts, whether it's a CIO office or a CTO or a startup, and make sure that they understand that you're engaging them not because of compliance like Section 508 or in the United States or EU 376, but you're engaging them to put human back into the design thinking. So this designing with humanity, or what I call human first, is absolutely crucial, especially in the context of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence today is made up of two major pieces. One is machine learns by having a lot of data, and then machine learns by having algorithm. So data and algorithm is what made up artificial intelligence. So when you write the algorithm, in terms of teaching the machine how to think, if we miss the nuances of, for example, it doesn't even have to be people with disability, or even just, for example, female like myself, because I think differently than, say, my male counterpart at IBM. So those kind of essence of a different perspective has to be programmed into the algorithm of AI. The other side is data. Artificial intelligence cannot be effective unless it has large amount of data that it keep learning and recognizing the pattern. One of the challenges we have with the disability area is we don't have a lot of the data set available. Many of you, for example, were entering into the Christmas shopping seasons, and you will hear on the news report, like, for example, this year our consumer, shopping has gone up, and in some cases they break it down by region, by geography, by gender, but we never hear them say by, for example, people with disabilities. And I think as an NGO or as government agencies or even private sectors, we have to begin to push to say we want to see, for example, the spending power of people with disabilities or aging. Because by the way, if you age like I am, like I always jokingly say, when I started this journey of managing disability, accessibility for IBM, I was in my 40s, early 50s, I didn't have any issues. But now as I get older, I start gaining a lot of disabilities. So my behavior, my consumer behavior, the data, whether it's Facebook or Google is tracking, ideally it should define and it should have the what we call the data point of what a person with disability can spend, because that's the power of using data for our advantage, because we can prove that how we can influence the future, quote unquote, the profitability of either organization or productivity of the government. So I think that the fundamental point, like Eve, you were mentioning, is that as we go into a technology underpinning world, which we know is here, it's actually even more important that we build in the human thinking and the human first kind of a concept into product design, into our strategy, especially with artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much. I think we can all applaud this because it's... Francis has this ability to explain technological arguments in a way that even not people that are tech savvy like myself can understand. I admire that skill. Francis, thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn over to Susan. Susan, you are a key driver in terms of raising awareness around AI intelligence and how it should be best used to facilitate the employment of people with disabilities. You are the author of some articles that I strongly recommend all of you in this room to read. One of them being is if you are not in the database, you never will be. And the second one is a one-pager called AI-Powered Unfair Recruitment. And so you are clearly the key expert here. So could you please kind of set up the scene so that people in the room get more familiar with either the risk or the opportunity of leveraging AI.
I will be focusing on the impact of AI recruitment tools, but I have to start by saying what you just saw was a brilliant example of what AI should be doing. This is, it has huge potential. We can't pretend for a moment that the potential to enhance the quality of life for so many is implicit in this science. I'm focused on the way an emerging threat, if you like, to the life chances of millions because of the way the AI recruitment tool development industry is taking off too fast, in my view. This is a response, of course, to a problem triggered by technology, because now you can have thousands of people apply for an individual job, and the role of the recruitment function is, in a sense, to discard as many as possible to try to find the ones that warrant a human intervention. I wanted to focus on one in particular. This is the HireVue model, but other companies are doing the same. So I'll talk a bit about the video interview process, but of course we have things like scanning the internet for everything you've ever put up about yourself and then giving the employer your psychological profile on the basis of what they see. Or one of my least favorite, I guess, is the virtual reality assessment that drops the job seeker into an ancient tomb. It's the Raider of the Lost Tomb approach to recruitment. And the candidate is expected to navigate their way through all sorts of, groovy, cool little challenges. A friend of mine who's been in a wheelchair his entire life, he's saying, does it drop me in as I'm in a wheelchair? Probably not. Does it drop me in as a walker, in which case I'd freak out? Right, I've never seen myself walk. But the point is that nobody's even asking these questions. The model that has had the most impact so far is this assumption that the employer nominates an ideal employee, let's call him Harry, and the machine learning microanalyzes Harry in terms of his face, his expressions, his sight lines, his voice tone, his word choice. Does he look up when he's clever, down when he's lying? And then they have interviewed, HireVue has alone 9 million people through the video interview. And they have no idea how many people with disabilities tried to get through, how many were discarded, how many were in the database. There are no disabled people in that employee database. And of course, we know that people with disabilities are much less likely to be in work. So they are, hence, if you're not in the database, you never will be, because the risk here is that it just reinforces a pattern of recruitment that replicates people you already have. There are a few things here that really concern us. One is the debate about bias in terms of AI recruitment never references people with disabilities. So the reason I grabbed the chance when Stefan suggested to be here, I need you all to go out there really talking about it all the time, because none of the debate about ethical AI or responsible AI talks about the potential impact on 20% of the population or the 1 in 3 50 to 64-year-olds that have a disability. There are 3 things here that really struck me. Most of the debate is on bias, which is the database problem. Let's be clear, the science, though it's interesting the University of Melbourne's calling it the quasi-science, I'd love to have a chance to debate you on that front, the science has not been validated on persons with disabilities, it just hasn't. Then they're claiming that a standardized process, because this is more than the technology, this is how it's deployed, the processes behind it that the candidates have to go through. They're saying that a standardized process removes human bias. But any sensible HR person knows a rigid process is discriminatory by definition. So for example, with HireVue, you have 3 minutes to answer the question, everybody. That's supposed to remove human bias. Not 3 minutes 15 if you stammer, and it takes you a little longer. How do you lip read a robot was another line that was going through my mind. So the standardized process, the assumption that somehow the technology magically removes human bias has to be challenged by developers and by the buyers. And then the third thing is that the database never takes into account or includes the behavior of the employer. So how can it accurately assess the job seeker who is the best for the job only if the employer lets them use JAWS, moves a parking bay, lets them start at 10? So it can't possibly take into account in the first assessments accurately predict the performance of a candidate who requires the employer to do some basic adjustments or accommodations for them to succeed. So it's flawed at every step of the way. So the good news is, I think we're seeing growing awareness now as we're bringing a community of thought leaders together. IBM at the table from day one. The World Bank is now starting to look at this with us, the European Disability Forum. The University of Melbourne yesterday saying that they're very concerned that they address this in the way they are looking at it from the scientific perspective. Oxford, Brookes University, the Australian Employers Network on Disability, because we see three sort of key factors here. Buyers will need to be more careful. We need to enable the employers who buy these tools to ask the right questions of the developers before they take the risk. Interesting, in the States, they're predicting a $3 billion hit on employer liability insurance. Maybe the insurance industry would resource some of what we're doing, because they're predicting a whole range of people, not just disabled, but including them, are going to start to sue on the grounds that they've been treated badly by an algorithm, when actually it might not even be that, it might be the standardized process that kicks in around it. We need guidance for the developers who genuinely don't know what to do. Because, of course, 10% of your workforce in a large company will probably have a disability, mostly, 80% non-visible? Are they going to tell you? How do you pull that out? And are we more concerned with the disabled people who aren't in work? Because they're the excluded ones who aren't going to get in unless the data about them is much more finely nuanced. And thirdly, we're seeing an interest from regulators. I had a meeting with the Human Rights Commission in Australia recently, and I threw out the idea, surely developers should be required by law to prove their assessment tools are safe before they can put them on the market. If you put a teddy bear on the market and the eyes might be swallowed by a child, the regulators pull the teddy bear. But a tool that could knock out millions and millions of people in terms of damaging their life chances, particularly as this grows exponentially, as recruiters increasingly turning for help to these tools to make their way through thousands and thousands of applicants. The interesting response was yes. So I think we're going to see a real interest on the part of regulators to not just have, I will sue you through the usual routes under employment law, but actually consumer protection. And ironically, if that's the word, we have two consumers, the individual who's trying to get a job, but all the recruiters locally are now using that, and they can't get through. And the buyers are also the consumers, who are now at risk, legal, reputation, and, dare we say, the risk of losing good people. My aim for the artificial intelligence community in all this is that these AI tools are designed to liberate human judgment, because it cannot be a way of taking the responsibility off the human recruiters to discard people without somehow having agency and governance implications for the company itself. I can talk for a couple of hours on this. Do I have any time left at all?
Oh, 1 minute.
1 minute. One minute.
Just because I'm kind.
I think we need, the good news is CogX, the huge conference for AI-obsessed human beings, and there's thousands of them, in June is offering us a panel, and we need to get a paper capturing some of these concerns and exploring what guidance would help the buyers. So working with the Global Business Disability Network as the buyers community to say, how do you minimize the risks for you? And to work with the academic institutions, the scientists, to say, what do the developers need to take into account? And of course, to take a look at what advice we might give regulators. There's one group I haven't mentioned. Who is going to give advice to the facially disfigured job seeker about when does he tell Harview that he has a facially disfigured, non-standard face because he suspects that he's going to get knocked out because he doesn't look anything like Harry? What advice do you give a job seeker? And if we can't give advice to job seekers on how to navigate this, we know we have a serious, serious challenge here.
Thank you very much, Susan. I like the way you shift the AI debate from a technology conversation only to a multi-stakeholders approach, and I like your approach. Really, it's really action-oriented, which is the main topic of the main objective of this conference, is for people leaving this conference with actions in mind and not only best practice or a good message or positive messages. I'm going now to go back to Ivo. I was thinking, what were the biggest challenges you encounter when developing the solution you showed us earlier today?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. I think there were three. I think the main thing is around sign language. So it's quite interesting to work in an environment, and I count myself as one of them, that has high standards and that wants to deliver the best possible quality, but being unable in any way, shape or form to judge the quality of the sign languages, which is the key component of this application. That was very hard, so I think that was I think for everyone involved in Storysign, we found it quite hard that we had limited control over our desire to deliver quality, which also brings me to the next point. We had to work very, very closely with the deaf community because there was no way we ever wanted to do this without their involvement. So partly because we can't judge it, but also how am I supposed to know what I should and shouldn't do and how I should or shouldn't do it without speaking to the people extensively or working very closely with. It wasn't like we asked them, what should we do? We worked very closely with deaf associations in every market that we launched in, very closely with families, with schools, and with the community to make sure this was the best thing. But obviously, that again then complicates the process because we tend to be a company that want to power through innovation quickly. We move at pace, and it was very, very important that we also took a step back and allowed people to do the necessary quality control and feed into the process in the right way, shape possible. And thirdly, the fact that sign language is incredibly complex. I mean, spoken language is relatively straightforward because it's analog, I guess. But the super detailed dexterity of the fingers, the shoulders, the facial expressions, everything that plays a part in sign language, and the fact that every sign language is local. So we did a book in Irish, English, and Australian, and the book is exactly the same because it's English, but the sign language is completely different. And that also meant that we had to do completely bespoke things for every sign language. And just the sheer detail that is required, and we can still make strides in that. I think that was really important. And I think to build on something that Susan just said, because I made some notes because I was really inspired by your story, I think the key with all of this and with AI and with all of the problems I think that were described is this is all a combination of art and science. And I think if we rely on AI or any technology to deliver the science bit, that's great, but we can't substitute the human art and expertise. And I think that is the constant, very narrow bridge we need to navigate in order to deliver this to great quality and not just think that this is going to replace everything.
Thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right. I would even echo what you just said, asking Francis, when Ivo says that we should involve people with different types of disabilities in not only in the user experience, but even before in the development of technologies, what's your views on that?
Well, I think that's I mean, that is so critical. Like I mentioned, when IBM has been touted as one of the actually leaders in this area, and it's very interesting if you look at the history of IBM. I think this is the only company that has survived 9 years or 10 years now, and no other company has done that, right? I mean, and then we're in the tech industry, so how do you feel the growth and sustainability of a technology company? That means a constant innovation. And if you look at the history that IBM actually had hired the first blind person in 1914, right? I mean, that's 76 years before American Disability Act. Why? At the time, the leader, at least in this case, the CEO of IBM, T.J. Watson, understood that the technology, the innovation comes from diversity of people, So that is the essence of how important it is. And that the person actually was hired into IBM Research. And we all know research of any organization is the fuel for innovation. So coming back is that it's not even into the design phase. It's really in the innovation phase. Because if you want, a different breakout thinking or different perspective, who better to provide that than a person with disabilities? I mean, in my book, I talked about if you think about a person who's disabled, how they navigate life on a day-to-day basis, all the barriers, all the challenges, physical, mental, and all that, and how they survive on, to go through life, that in itself is every day is an innovation. So as companies, if you are really progressive thinking, and also in today and age, especially we're talking about future of work, right? The future job is going to be very different than what's today. We know that most of the job that can be codified, for example, accounting, even stock picking, that will be done by artificial intelligence, by robots, by AI. The job that cannot be codified are what I call the edge job. Think about a bell curve. The edge jobs are the things that are actually going to require creativity, require ingenuity that's nonlinear. Those are actually what I call the human trade job. And who's better at understanding human ability and human kind of nuances than people with disability, right? So I think there is for the future of work, which is a theme of this conference, I actually think that because the technology is getting more and more personalized, I mean, a great example of a sign language is localized to individual, and yet AI, can tackle that, shows that I don't think we have to worry about the personalization of technology. It's going to adjust to us. It's going to adapt to individuals situationally. But what it cannot do is understand the nuances of diversity or differentiation. So that's why I actually think that the future of work is going to give people with disability potentially a lot more opportunity to participate than frankly where we are today. Because if you look at the employment rate of people of disability today is not that encouraging. But if we go into the world and understand that technology is here to stay, and that technology is evolving to be personalized, and if we choose to engage the technologists here and now, then I think the potential is absolutely going to be very positive.
Thank you, Francis. I think that based on what we just heard from Ivo and Francis, what do you think should be the next step concretely to put together all different stakeholders around the same table?
I do think it would be helpful to focus, because AI touches so much. If we were to say what needs to be done to minimize potential damage to the life chances of hundreds of millions who have a disability, because we know extreme users, right? If systems work for extreme users, they work better for everybody. So if you can get through an online recruitment process and an AI-powered assessment, and you're speech impaired and you need subtitles, probably someone with English as a second language is going to find it easier to get through. We know that it's a way, in effect, of acting as a litmus test for discrimination in a system. I think in terms of next steps, we need to tell the stories and bring this more alive. We need to, we're talking, James Partridge is here from Face Equality International, and we're talking about how we can bring people with facial disfigurements and speech impediments and people who have Botox that kind of didn't go too right and all kinds of things together to say to camera, I can't get through, and how do you lip read a robot? And I couldn't get through, just to start to get people to think about it, because I think genuinely most of the developers just never occurred to them. And so when I talked to the guys at HireVue, they were quite interested in saying, well, we don't know what to do. I didn't pick up anything that said, we don't want to do something here. But first we have to get this on the agenda. I was very heartened that the Oxford Brookes University is launching a new AI and Ethics Institute. We met on Friday, and they're saying, we haven't even done our website yet. We want to raise the profile of this. This is exactly the kind of potential ethical stroke reputational AI-related thing that we need to be addressing now. So we need your help to get that out. We need buyers to start to say, you have the power to slow down what's going on in terms of the developers, asking them evidence they have validated this, evidence that it does not discriminate against someone with facial disfigurement. And you've also, of course, got the power to say, we need to challenge that standardized process, removing human bias assumption, which is simply a naive assumption, because the developers don't understand that we treat people differently to treat them fairly. They haven't got that yet. But you can, as buyers, I'm hoping I've got lots of buyers in the room, say, we need to work with you as developers to make sure that we're getting this right. And certainly from our perspective, we're bringing this community together to say, let's look in practical ways at what guidelines would help buyers, what insights and guidelines help developers, what do the regulators need to know, and to look at the intermediaries and say, you need to know more about the way employers actually operate. If you're going to coach someone with a disability into a job, you need to understand what hoops they have to jump through to get in. My worry is that many of the organizations that are funded to help disabled people into work all over the world don't understand what's going on from the perspective of the employer process, what the individuals are going to have to go through. So they can't coach the individual to come in and say, actually, you guys, I suspect you're using HireVue. Actually, it's not going to work for me because, but there's some good practice which says that you should actually have 2 or 3 routes in. It shouldn't just be HireVue. And that requires intermediaries to be closely attuned to what Safaricom's doing on the ground, how you recruit, and make sure that you enable the individual to negotiate a more equitable and fair journey through that process. So I know what needs to be done. How? Well, we're not quite sure on the how at this point, but a partnership with the Global Business Disability Network is where we're going to start.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. I would like to now give the floor to the audience. Would you have questions for our, look, you're lucky enough to have experts on stage that are there for you. So don't be shy and ask any kind of questions. The only dumb questions are the questions that are not asked. So feel free to venture and dare to ask any questions you have in mind. Sure, Francis.
Can I just add one, you asked the how. I do like to add one perspective is that I think there is a lot of work that we collectively can do in the startup area. You know, every country, every city has incubator, accelerator of the next generation of the IBM, the Microsoft, the Google of the world. I think it's absolutely crucial that we engage these young startup companies, you know, the young millennials who are inventing, and have them be exposed to, for example, working with people with disability, get, you know, very firsthand exposure when they are building that next, you know, generation of recruitment software or a device, you know, for consumers. That, to me, is a very practical and very high impact of involvement that all of us can ask our city or government or the business in your local area to say, can I, you know, if an NGO, if you are or you are a business involved in that innovate, because that's about innovation for the next gen.
Thank you, Francis. Any questions from the audience? Do not forget to turn on your mic.
There's one there. Simon?
Hello, my name is Simon Brown from Sightsavers. I'm really interested about the avatar and learning how does the avatar learn? We're talking about artificial intelligence, and one of the challenges, I recall a conversation with a deaf person a few weeks ago, was the kind of dynamic watching the news and not being able to get an avatar to really be able to express what the newsreader was reading because of the facial nature of signing. So I'm really interested to understand more, how does the avatar learn as part of artificial intelligence?
That's an amazing question. The answer to that is it doesn't learn very well yet. So in this first stage of development, that is one of the hardest to actually read. For a machine to read and understand sign language is definitely version 2, because to your point, it is so, even in spoken languages, so there's accents, there's different nuances, people do things differently, and there's so many dimensions in sign language that play a role with that. So currently, the avatar doesn't learn that much yet, which is why we've got preloaded selected children's books that we put in. Where the AI plays a big part is helping to read the text, translate it to the sign language, spot that a child might not be holding the phone in the right way, in dark, at different angles, etc. So the AI focuses very heavily on enabling the reading and translating part, not necessarily on having a real-time 3D avatar model, which is definitely something we're looking into, but it's slightly more complex. But it's also the only way that we can truly take this to the next level, really. It's a really good question.
And that would have
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, at that point, you're just talking about actual real-time translation from and to sign language in any language, which is a true game changer. And it's not, and then it's also not limited to children's books, reading, literacy, then it's everything. I get quite passionate about this, so I should probably calm down.
Please.
Yeah, hi, my name is Shashank. I'm from Vishesh in India. I have a question about AI. Every technological innovation or change has led to tremendous opportunities as well. So while there are, of course, aspects that we should be worried about, what are the things that you think are going to change for the better for persons with disabilities as AI gets better and better? The other is, I have a small comment, if I could, on the question the gentleman asked, because we work with deaf kids. Can I just say something about that right now? About the facial reading bit. So our experience with deaf kids is that when they've looked at animated content in general, the level of engagement is so significantly higher than what they have in general that they sort of find it very, very engaging to begin with. So of course, while there is scope for improvement and making it more human-like, for most deaf kids, other than those that interpret in the same signs that they use, most often it's a very unusual experience. So given what they have, particularly in emerging markets like India and China, et cetera, it's a huge upside from the engagement that they've been getting in general.
Who wants to answer this question?
AI making it better?
Question or just a comment?
Yeah, right.
I think what you're hearing is there's so many ways in which AI could make life better for persons with disabilities that we're stuck at trying to think of one immediately. Because we're conscious, you know, I'm coming in very focused on my particular issue here. But of course, anything that that liberates people, because of it, the work you're doing is, to me, just illustrates it. It's so difficult to narrow it down. As long as people with disabilities are actively involved, you know, sky's the limit, surely. But don't forget, the call for a moratorium on the development of facial recognition technology in the States has been called on behalf of everyone, right? This is new stuff. And so that's why this new institute on AI and ethics is saying, you know, we need to really explore this on behalf of everyone, including now people with disabilities, because often it illustrates a wider problem.
Can I make a comment? I think, you know, AI, somebody actually mentioned that AI is going to be a fundamentally revolutionary technology. And we're just at the very beginning of that. And I think, you know, we talked about, you know, the facial expression actually is very important for deaf, you know, interpretation. At the same time, facial recognition, all of you know, is highly controversial right now as a privacy issue. So I think as time goes on, we're going to see a convergence of privacy, security, and accessibility coming together. All three elements are actually, 10 years ago, we will not be sitting here talking about it. But on the other hand, because these technologies are getting so personal, that's why you see that, you know, who owns the data, right? And who owns my face? If my face is going to be used, you know. We don't have the answer yet, but we do know, like Susan talked about, like Eve suggested, that this is a technology because it affects human, and all of us here are human still right now, that we have to come together and not be absent. And I think historically, the disability community has not been as active in the technology discussion, but this is the time and place where we absolutely have to be there, because let's say we're going to produce the next generation of a privacy, you know, like GDPR, you know, version 2 or 3 or 4. We got to make sure that we're at the table and introduce, for example, the accessibility consideration at the same time. And I do believe that all three of them is going to come together. It's not going to be a binary like privacy only or security only, accessibility. Historically, again, these are very siloed, but we're coming to a situation where we need to have the integration of all these elements because it's just like human, you know, it's complex. And if with that kind of understanding, and maybe that's actually understanding we should introduce to training artificial intelligence, so it's not a binary which actually can create bias, but more of a multidimensional perspective.
Yes, and one thing that I thought in response to your question, which is very similar to what Susan said, is I think before we get into a collective brainstorm about all the problems that potentially AI could solve, I think looking at it as a symbiosis where the AI technology works very closely with the human mind to liberate that human judgment or to enhance the creativity that we've got, I think then we have an opportunity to solve many problems, if not all of them. But I think we need to recognize that never the technology will do it by itself. And if it does, it becomes a lot harder for us to guide the technology to do it in the right way with all the measures in place in terms of respect for privacy, but also a fair and inclusive and human-first execution. So I think if we look at the technology as something that can enhance us and extend us and liberate our creativity, then we can solve any problem. But we just have a responsibility and an opportunity, all of us, to lay the bricks to make sure that it happens in the best possible manner for everyone.
And to add to that, we haven't said the word surveillance. I don't know if you meant surveillance when you said privacy, sort of that's the flip side of it. I was talking to James saying, does someone with a facial disfigurement, when the implicit message from the facial recognition bunch is it's not a face, is that an advantage now? Yeah? So you can't actually be monitored every minute of the day in whatever country and then be rewarded for going the right direction and penalized if you don't. So I do think that your message, Francis, about the need to be part of this conversation takes me back to the first thing I said. None of the debates that really matter about the AI ethical domain are talking about the impact on persons with disabilities. It's just absent. And until we get to that table, and until we also start to say, actually, this isn't an HR director issue or a CIO or a CTO issue. This is a board issue. This is governance. This is how any major corporate takes a look at how you as a board ensure that you are deploying this technology in a way that is appropriate, defensible, addressing the risks, minimizing, maximizing ops, all the things that a board's supposed to be looking at. And my worry is that on the recruitment and employment front, the board isn't paying attention. And that I think HR directors are going to need to position it with the board as part of that board conversation about how, in terms of corporate governance, we're managing the implications being generated by this technology.
Please.
Thank you very much for the very timely conversation. I look after recruitment for Safaricom, and coincidentally, Susan, I actually use HireVue. But what we've done is, and this is just a comment, we've actually asked the vendor to turn off the AI facility, because the AI piece not just discriminates people who perhaps don't have your standard face, but even from a cultural standpoint, what the Americans or the people in the UK have mapped as a person with a good attitude based on the facial expression might not be the same for a different culture. And therefore, what we do is actually just watch the videos, and another human being on the other side watches the video. But what we find is that it does allow us to be more inclusive, especially for the majority of people applying for our jobs, because with the remote video interviewing, they don't have to travel distances to come and interview. Right. And what we do is, because as they're applying for the jobs, we ask them to indicate their disability. We actually, and most of the time they're not the majority, we actually invite them to the office. So we have the normal people, able-bodied people record on the video, but the ones who have any disability come into the office and actually talk to us. So that's how we're going around the technology issue until the world figures it out. Yeah? Thank you.
Brilliant. I love it when someone proves I'm right. Because what you've done is you're saying it's the way you deploy the technology, that you don't just leave it with the HireVue AI tool. You say, actually, we are responsible for the impact it's having, and we're not going to turn that on, and we will let you come here, and we will flex the process. Because that's HR taking responsibility for the whole end-to-end process. That's what we need. So you have to be on the working group. Thank you.
It's a hidden invitation. Yes.
Received. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yes?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I'm El Sayed Turki from Federation of Egyptian Industries. Given the excellent experiences shared during this session and the other experiences which will be shared over the 2 days, can we have any technological solution to allow us to be connected all over the year so that we can get benefit from our experiences on a permanent basis? It's a pity that we cannot share further experiences during the year. Thank you.
This is a very good question that I will have to ask our dear organizers how to fix this. But you're absolutely right. That would be great. So let me take it as a question to the team. And this is right. Well, this is also very important to remind people that we have rapporteurs for each session that will make a brief summary of the topics that were discussed, and they will. These summaries will be used to create some sort of an action report that will be proposed to people. But you're right, having a platform for sharing more than experiences and really point of views here is key. Thank you for your suggestion, very interesting. Are there any questions in the room? Yes, I can see.
Yeah. Hello, I am Amit Jain. I'm currently a postdoc research fellow at University of St. Gallen. My question is, like I was discussing, Suzanne was talking about the AI and the interviewing process and how it can be different than it was shared that there is we have to have a flexibility in the process of recruitment where people who are persons with disabilities are asked to come to the office and do the interview and not. What would be your take, especially from Suzanne? I would like to know what will be your take on the disclosure, because in the research or in many of the works I've seen, especially disclosure by people who have invisible disabilities have a challenge. So how do you see AI helping them out more, especially people with invisible disabilities, or will it be more of a challenge if they disclose or don't disclose?
The question of disclosure for me has always been, do you require the employer to do something differently in order to be able to prove that you can do this job? If you do, then it's in your interest to tell the employer what you need. you don't have to tell them necessarily what your diagnosis is, but you know, if you offer to interview me up 6 flights of stairs, I'm not going to get there. You know, it's a very practical base. In terms of how AI could address this, I'm hoping that AI could make it easier for a company to say, typically we go to this university and require that degree, but maybe AI could help us to figure out what actually these individuals know, and then we could go to a whole raft of places where they may not have the posh degree capability, but the students come out with that know-how. So it does get us to a broader range of people, which means that a broader range of people with perhaps non-visible impairments have a chance to come through the normal competitive process. So there are certainly opportunities here. I think the CV screening tools that now look for CVs that match successful CVs of the past, and well done Amazon for coming clean publicly to say, ooh, we discovered that the only successful CVs had men on them. And now, well, we canceled it. I thought, well done you. So I think if creative approaches in terms of how AI screens CVs starts to look for indications that someone with a disability has found creative ways of getting through systems, not paying any attention to perhaps their failure to get work experience, because someone's taught the AI that many disabled students can't get work experience for nothing to do with their capability. It's just the employers weren't prepared to give them work experience. This was certainly Barclay's experience some years ago. So maybe AI can break through some of that if it's taught at the beginning, that we're looking for people who have got through a degree program, and we don't give a huge weighting to their work experience if we see some evidence that perhaps that had nothing to do with their capability. Am I answering your question?
Can I answer that? Can I answer that? I think Susan is absolutely right. I think there is actually a shift from a resume or degree-based kind of workplace qualification to what we call ability-based. And also, I think the whole employment landscape is changing from today, as we know, as employer-employee, you know, a kind of relationship, and shifting to the gig economy in the future, where a lot of times you're going to have individual with the ability on equal kind of a base of choosing employers, because the whole gig economy is that I'm going to have more independence and freedom. So I think we're going to begin to see individuals posting, for example, what they are capable of doing, not about disability, but what their abilities are, what they like, their preferences. And then AI in the background will have the ability to do a better matching of the personal preferences and ability and against the job that's out there. So all these changing of the kind of a labor dynamics, and plus the kind of historic from a degree base to apprenticeship to an ability-based kind of a labor movement is, and AI actually potentially can play a positive party in that matching.
Gentleman beneath the camera there.
Thank you. I think the conversation is getting quite interesting. My name is Adewale. I work with the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association. You know, the discussion has focused to a large extent on the individual and also the organization. And I'm just wondering, I think I had a conversation with Packard during the tea break. You know, in the short and the long term, what do you see the role of the employers organization? You know, what role can the employers organization play to facilitate this process, or also be actively involved in bringing this conversation to light in our various countries?
Thank you.
You have a huge role to play, because you've got this marvelous position where you're regarded as credible by your member companies, and your ability to convene new conversations by alerting them to the trends you're seeing. For example, Unilever will have many subsidiaries in Nigeria. They use HireVue all the time. You can now say to your people, your members, well, Safaricom are doing that. What are we doing? Simply simply getting a sense from them of what's going on the ground and encouraging them to, in a practical way, say, well, how should we as a business community here anticipate, produce guidance for our members, work with people with disabilities locally so we get both sides of the table, start the conversation. And certainly what we know, without any doubt, is data does not change human behavior. It's just a fact, I'm afraid. Data makes it easier to justify what you've already decided to do because you've had lunch with a guy of small stature who runs an interesting theater company. And then you have to persuade your board to buy in. And there's lots of them. I said at a conference recently, how many blind people do you need before you treat one properly? But the point I make is, you're in a brilliant position to convene new conversations focused on the future. How are we going to do this better locally? And see what emerges. And I think practical guidance for your members on how to max the opportunities and minimize the risks. Great. And then, we connect to what's happening in Kenya, and we start to share because you've got a business network there. I mean, it's just easy, I think. At least starting the conversation is.
I'm sure you will admire how smart Susan puts the pressure on employers' organizations. So keep that in mind. One last question from the gentleman there, I'm sorry, and then I'll give the floor to Deb, our rapporteur.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Andy from Shell. I'd like to invite the panel to fast forward to the ILO conference in 20 years' time, in 2039. And will history tell us that AI has been a help or a hindrance for the life of people with a disability? Whilst we've heard transformational stories like StorySign, we've also heard that the labour market is going to polarise, jobs in the middle will be lost, and if you're not in the database, you're not in the database. So do the panel see, fast forward in 20 years, it will be a help or a hindrance?
Is that one word we get? We choose a word?
You want to get this?
You go.
First of all, I would certainly hope that it's a help. I also hope that we don't need to wait for 20 years for it to become a help. I would hope that we can realize true equality and guide our AI technology in a way that does all the things that this panel talks about today properly a lot quicker than that.
Thank you very much. Would you like to add something?
I am also very optimistic. I mean, just as we are at the very beginning of AI, but there's so much discussion about future of work and its impact on the society, not just the people with disability. I mean, there's major labor-based discussion in this area. It's going to make all of us be very mindful and intentional about this new technology. I don't recall any, at least in my 30-some years in technology, where so much human interest is in the technology than AI. So on that front alone, I'm very optimistic. I'm also seeing a new innovation. I was just contacted by a professor in Seoul, Korea, of all places. Earlier we talked about today's AI needs a lot of big data, lots of data, but he's actually developed a platform where individual can create AI based on your interest. So in other words, there's democratization of AI technology at the individual level. So if that kind of innovation continue to come out, then it's not going to be the big enterprise like, some big company own your data, but you will own your data. So I think this is actually makes it very interesting and that caused me to be very optimistic.
I'll be optimistic if and when the HR community lifts its game here. Because I think I had an interesting conversation with the HR director at a company called Simply Business, and she thinks that she should have 5 or 6 different routes in so that the individual can say, I would shine better if I sent you my video. Another one would say, actually, I do better at interview. And another one says, here's my CV first, and then could we do that? And the AI tool could be simply one of them. I think, I'm hoping we will get to a point where perhaps even the AI would enable her to assess people who have used different routes more accurately. So there's an interesting opportunity there. But for me, it will be helpful when it doesn't control the decisions. When it's simply one of the options and is being deployed thoughtfully by high-performance HR directors.
Can I go twice?
Oh, greedy, greedy.
Sorry. I'm optimistic for another reason. The fact that it's currently 2019 and we're sat here talking about the future of work and acknowledging the influence that AI has on it, I think is first and foremost a compliment to the organisers of this event, but also secondly really reassuring that we will be able to make this right.
Thank you, Ivo. It's always good to end this kind of conversation with a positive note. And I don't know about you, but I feel smarter now than I was 90 minutes ago. So I would like, before giving the floor to Deborah for a rapporteur exercise, I would like to congratulate and thank and applaud all the speakers today. Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming to this session right after lunch. I know that's always a very hard session to be at, but thanks to the International Labor Organization for doing this conference. I hope they will do it again year after year because it's very important that we all come together and have these conversations. And I also want to applaud all of the corporations that are part of the Global Business Disability Network because we all need to be at the table, which we've seen over and over again and heard from the panel today. I actually am always optimistic, but I am optimistic about artificial intelligence. I'm nervous about a lot of different things that were covered on the panel today that we really have to address. Some of the risks that we've heard over and over again are understanding what does it mean to be truly human. So we're deciding to create artificial intelligence when I believe that we don't really understand what it means to be truly intelligent as a human being. So I think we have a lot of opportunity there, and as Susan had mentioned, we've got to keep telling the stories. Data. The data is very bad for our community. It is, we have unconscious bias. Maybe we have deliberate bias in some case. It is not just for people with disabilities, it's other disenfranchised groups, but the reality is we are more disenfranchised than others. Data has not been included. We do not have good data sets for people with disabilities and certainly people with all the different types of disabilities that makes it this wonderful, unique community. We also have, as we've been predicting, more and more of us are aging into disabilities. And I'm seeing just corporations are they're just freaking out now because I was speaking to a large global bank a few weeks ago and they said, but our highest net worth individuals are now aging into disabilities and we're concerned about cybersecurity and we're concerned about, it's like, we told y'all this was coming. And the reality is it's going to affect all of us. And my generation, the generation of baby boomers, we've been so youth-oriented for so long, and now we're like, oh, we're obsolete. We have 5 generations in the workforce. So there's all of these things are risk, not being included, people with disabilities not being properly represented. And representation in all aspects of that word as well, gender representation, age representation, religion, all of the diversity groups. And so, as Susan had mentioned, guidance to developers and to regulators. As Francis mentioned, privacy surveillance. As we've all been mentioning, representation. These are risks, but they're also rewards for us. There's confusion about artificial intelligence. Is it going to kill us all, as all of our sci-fi has told us? Or is it going to really improve the lives of all of us? And we're going to really understand, once again, what does it mean to be truly human? The rewards are, and one more risk, losing the small ground that we have covered, the small grounds that we haven't done enough to truly include people with disabilities in our workforce and transportation, housing, on and on and on. And so I think we have the risk of actually going backwards, and that's very troubling. I mean, I think that's happening in developing and developed countries alike. The rewards are some of those negatives, you know. Let's rethink what it means to be human. Let's rethink our societies. Let's rethink how technology could serve us. Let's rethink brands that care about us. Kudos to Huawei, kudos to IBM, kudos to the global all of the GBDN members that are here in these really tough conversations. I also think partnerships. Ivo mentioned how important the partnership is. Why would you build an app and not include our community, and not include our community in a robust way as well? You can bring in one person that's staff, but does that really represent all the nuances? So the representation, we have a lot of work to do with the representation. I recently have I'm blessed, like these other speakers, to be invited to speak all over the world. And I've recently started turning down some of the speaking engagements saying, you need younger people with disabilities, you need more visible people with visible disabilities, because yes, I have invisible disabilities, and as Frances said, as I'm aging, they're becoming more apparent. My depression, my ADHD, my humanness, right? And then of course, our families are being impacted. My husband sadly has early onset dementia, and to watch him lose what he acquired his whole life, it's really hard for us families that are impacted. I have a daughter with Down syndrome who just moved out on her own, yay, supported apartment, but still there's a lot of work to do and there's a lot of risks. We really have to keep saying over and over again, nothing about us without us. True, proper representation. We have to reward the brands that are rewarding us. We have to encourage these brands to be employers of choice. So I think there's so many things that actually, I think we can be excited about. I liked the point that Frances made about making sure the entrepreneurs and the innovators are included. This is another opportunity the brands have, the hackathons, the including us in the conversations, using us to look at all the human touch points. As Susan noted, we've got to make sure the right people are in the conversation. We need the employers in the conversation. I live in the United States, and I know our SHRM, a Society of Human Resource Managers, they really do care about this conversation. They're trying to figure out how to engage it more meaningfully, but there's a lot of work to do. And sharing, I think globalization is a risk and a reward. And so sharing it in these kind of really important conversations, knowing the UN across the board is getting behind us, knowing that this is about the future of the work, future of humanity, what it means to be truly human. I think this is what artificial intelligence can give us, but at the same time, if we don't break down some of these biases, unconscious biases, we're going to continue to fail and lose ground. And so I think we have a lot of opportunities, but a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah.